cancer treatment has advanced remarkably over the years because now there is recognition that there are all these different types that will respond to certain drugs or not, and you have to change that up. That's where we're going with tinnitus treatment.
Is my brain trying to compensate for the sounds that I'm
Yeah,
missing or not hearing so well?
simple things. For some people, changing your diet can help.
Okay.
For other people, that's not going to have an
Right.
effect.
Right.
That's undertaken with the best of intentions, but the side effect of that is you're training yourself to become very good at hearing tinnitus.
Right. Welcome back to Resonate the podcast. I'm your host, Lesleigh Smith, and this is a show where science, stories, and wisdom meet. Earlier in the series, we talked about how hearing is more than just your ears only, and how hearing health is deeply connected to brain health, cognition, even sleep, and how well we age. We also learned that brains can be retrained, meaning that there are things that you can do at home to improve your functioning of the resources that you have, because brains actually can rewire and adapt with the right kinds of inputs, methods, and support. Today, we're zooming in on one very specific and very common condition that sits right at the intersection between hearing and the brain, and that's tinnitus. Some people might have heard it, tinnitus. For millions of people, tinnitus is described in lots of different ways, but I've heard it described as constant ringing, buzzing, hissing, or a whooshing sound, and that nobody else can hear. Just imagine for a second, if you close your eyes, trying to have a conversation with someone, but the entire time you have the sound of a screaming steam train whistling in your head or a constant roaring of cicadas. And you're trying to ignore that and just listen through it to the conversation at hand. I mean, I think that would be incredibly distressing, exhausting, and eventually feeling quite isolating because nobody else would know how hard you're working or what you're going through. It's invisible to other people. Now, many people out there are told that there's nothing they can do about it and they just have to live with it. But luckily, science and us today are here to tell a different story. My guest today is Dr. Grant Searchfield, and I'm delighted to have him here, one of Australasia's leading experts on tinnitus and a researcher at the University of Auckland. He's also founder of True Silence Therapeutics, and he actually leads the audiology section at the University of Auckland. Now, today we're going to talk about what tinnitus actually is, why it happens, and how the brain is involved. We're going to talk candidly about what genuinely helps and what doesn't help. Tinnitus is far more treatable and manageable than most people realize. So let's just get right in there and dive in.
Fantastic.
So before we get too far into the science and the technology,
The perception of sound in the absence of a true external sound. More often now, we're also providing an additional categorization, which is tinnitus disorder. And the difference between tinnitus and tinnitus disorder is when that unreal non-sound that is heard actually becomes a problem for the individual and begins to change and impact on their life.
right.
So that's when people are really disturbed by it. Because a number of people experience tinnitus perhaps momentarily, particularly after loud concerts or loud sounds, but it goes, it fades. That's tinnitus.
Okay.
But when it persists and begins to impact on quality of life, begins to affect sleep, results in people withdrawing socially, impacts on their hearing, their concentration, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we really begin to label it tinnitus disorder.
Okay.
So many, very many people experience tinnitus. A small proportion of people will experience tinnitus disorder.
Right.
And it's mainly tinnitus disorder that we see in the clinic.
Right. Right. Okay.
And
So
that's what we're really trying to manage.
right. So there's the distinction where at some stage in your life, you may or may not hear tinnitus, but it's not necessarily going to, as you said, be a downward spiral unless you're one of the fewer people where it does negatively affect you.
So I think it's a little bit like setting up dominoes
Mm-hmm.
and setting them all off, clicking them.
Right.
That the thing that starts everything, it might be hearing loss,
Mm-hmm.
it might be a head injury, it might be extreme stress, but that's the point that pushes that first domino over.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, the first few dominoes fall, but for whatever reason, it doesn't carry on and doesn't become a problem. It's like there's a gap
Right.
between the dominoes.
Right.
But for other people, it just carries on, and cumulatively it affects one area of the brain or next in terms of gathering things beyond the hearing system, such as attention, emotional effects, cognitive process, how we think about things, and driving anxiety. And when anxiety comes to play, then all those things begin to consolidate, and the individual gets very good at hearing the tinnitus sound,
Right.
which then drives more attention, which then drives them become better at hearing the tinnitus sound.
Right.
So when people experience tinnitus, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to become a problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For those people that have tinnitus as a problem,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean it can't be reversed.
Right.
But it does mean that there are some things that need to be done to help from ending up on that downward spiral.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, I'm hearing some gems in that. I mean, one is that tinnitus isn't as simple as an ear problem. It's kind of like a holistic brain perception problem, if you want to use that word. But secondly, and more importantly, there is hope because, as you just said, that you can retrain those parts of the brain, or just stop that spiral. So, okay. Um, what now that we know what tinnitus is, what are some of the most common causes? You mentioned excessive noise, but just in your words, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear what some of the
So
common causes are.
most people's experience of tinnitus will be that sort of nightclub tinnitus,
Yeah.
often after really loud concerts and so on. It may only last a day, the next day, and then it goes. Um, Prolonged loud noise exposure, so industrial noise exposure is one of the most common causes. Brief, intense noise exposure, shooting,
Mm,
explosions, those sorts of things. Um, Head injuries, very common cause. Probably seen the cartoons where, the cartoon character runs into a wall, falls over, and then their bird circling their head. Um, Stress is certainly a very strong modifier.
mm-hmm.
Um, there's discussion that most people have some background sound in their head or ears. Certainly, if young university students go into a soundproof room, most of them will hear some sort of sound there that they don't hear when they go into a normal
Right.
environment. By definition, when they're hearing it, that's tinnitus.
Right.
It's just it's not
It's sort of situation specific in that
situation
example. Yeah.
specific.
Okay. Okay.
The perfect storm for tinnitus is a combination of hearing injury, head injury, and emotional impact. And this is why it's often uh, common in veterans, for
Right.
example,
Of
in the
course.
United States.
Yes.
It's the number one service-related injury, and that would be the same through many militaries, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm.
where individuals are exposed to loud sounds. They perhaps have had a head injury or concussion, and at the same time experienced quite horrific things.
Mm,
So this combination, people often say that their tinnitus arose with an emotional event, the passing of a loved one or something like that there. And maybe that's the tinnitus has been there,
mm-hmm.
but that event really begins to focus the attention on those things that may be in the background until that point. And that sensitizes the hearing system. So one of the big things about tinnitus is it really represents the sensitization of a number of different aspects of how we hear. So there's more focused on how we hear, the pathways in the brain that transfer information up to the hearing part of the brain
Right.
become extra active. The hearing part of the brain becomes extra active. It connects with these other parts of the brain that are involved in emotion and tension. They become extra active. And this sensitization is an overall categorization. And we can think of some really key important parts of the brain that are involved in tinnitus. And one of the things that people say to me is, well, can you see that in the brain?
Yeah.
And when we talk about the brain's involvement, one really important thing to point out is that the brain doesn't have necessarily any injuries. This is the way that the brain is working. So if you were to do a CT scan or a brain image,
Mm-hmm.
you might not see anything there because structurally it's not changed. It's just functionally
Right.
how the brain has learnt to use this information and understand it that has changed.
Right. Okay.
So
Okay.
just like
So it's kind of like the spaghetti junction of the brain still is the spaghetti junction of the brain, but the traffic on spaghetti junction might be slightly different.
yeah, the traffic, the connections are better,
Right.
right? But and the flow of information, the number of cars on
Yes.
the road has gone up,
Okay.
and they're traveling really fast between these regions.
Okay.
So it's like you have the foundations of a motorway network, but not the connections there. And then there's this tinnitus onset, and suddenly those connections are fired up, and they're all flying about with this
Okay.
information.
Okay. Um, if we come back to one of the causes of tinnitus, and you mentioned like the perfect storm, and one of them might be an impact on hearing, and excessive noise would probably be one of the more common. But um, are there other causes of hearing loss that may have tinnitus?
Yeah.
Is it hearing loss in general that may possibly have
Hearing loss.
tinnitus?
So something as simple as wax in the ear
Oh, truly.
can create tinnitus, and the good news is when the wax
That's just
removed,
temporary. Yeah. Okay.
middle ear infections again.
Mhm.
If that subsides, although if
Mhm.
it's there for a while, the brain can focus in on that.
Mhm.
And sometimes when the injury goes away, the brain can still hear it. Damage to the ear, ototoxicity, so medications that have been given
Okay.
as cancer treatment and so on. So really anything that changes activity, and sometimes very small, within the auditory pathways
Okay.
can be the trigger for that tinnitus onset.
Okay. So auditory pathway, so it doesn't have to be the ear as such. So I did have one customer ask me a good question a while ago, and I'll pose this to you. He said, "Okay, my hearing is down at these couple of tones. It doesn't affect me for talking and communication at all, but you've told me that the tinnitus is most likely triggered initially by this hearing problem at these two pitches." So his analogy was, it's is my brain, his words, is my brain a bit like a radio squelch, kind of where it's turning up the squelch to try to find those missing frequencies? So is my brain trying to compensate for the sounds that I'm
Yeah,
missing or not hearing so well?
yeah. So really, that's this concept of sensitization or volume control, that in order to try and extract more information, or in order to try and find out what's really going on, that the brain winds up its volume. And if you're out in the country with your car radio, and the further you go away from the station, and might want to hear something, so you turn it up to hear the person's voice, but what
Mhm.
you're also turning up is the background static.
Right,
And there gets a point where you think, actually, the combination there is too much. I'm
right.
not hearing the voice. I'm going to turn that radio off. And
Okay.
so it's that sensitization. So, and often the pitch, the sound that is heard, actually mirrors the area of hearing damage
Well, that's
as
interesting.
well.
Right. Okay. Um, Going back to The domino analogy, I really like that. And some people, the dominoes will start, but there'll be a wee gap. And kind of that's the end of it. I've heard the tinnitus, but it's not distressing me. But then others will end up with the dominoes continuing, or even the dominoes getting larger, perhaps. Why? Why does it bother some people but not others? Why would some people barely notice it?
People will know in the general population and their friends and family that there are members of their family that seem very aware of everything.
Mm.
Some of that may manifest as anxiety, while other people are very chilled, for example, and very relaxed. And there is a tendency for those people who do react and are more anxious for the tinnitus to multiply quickly. That's actually a very good survival mechanism. So if you are in a primitive environment or a survivor island or something like that,
Yeah.
in your tribe, you really want an anxious person. All right.
Okay.
And the reason being is that they will always be the person that identifies that there's something threatening in the environment.
Right.
So they're going to be the person that obsesses about the fact that there is something in the bushes, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to focus on that. They're going to examine that more. And a laid back person may not. I don't worry about that. Everything's right.
Yeah.
And in that environment, it's very helpful because the anxious people are more likely to survive than the relaxed people because they'll get eaten, right? We think about that.
Right.
We turn it around, and in today's environment, the anxieties are different, but those mechanisms exist. So when tinnitus presents itself, often those people that will have that better ability at identifying and analyzing threats will be more likely to detect the tinnitus and then react to it.
Okay.
And then if you pile on top of that any depression or anxiety, that's when it gathers pace into becoming a problem. Doesn't mean that everybody that has tinnitus disorder has clinical anxiety or depression. It just means that probably the part of the brain that's very good at extracting information and then reacting to it is highly tuned. And those people for whom they hear tinnitus but it subsides are more likely to be less good at extracting that. Right. So it's a little bit of a about face in terms of what is valuable and what is not. So you might have a very good survival mechanism, but that may also heighten your awareness in reaction to tinnitus.
Got it. Okay. Just to bring it back to like a specific example, for someone who wakes up every night at 3 a.m, for example, with this noise screaming in their head and they're getting worked up and understandably upset, what should they know?
Yeah. First thing is that that silent environment without a lot happening is an ideal listening environment. And so it is natural for them to be very aware of tinnitus at that particular point in time. A lot of us, if we wake up during the night, we begin to think about and worry about what we've got coming up or what we did the day before. And then we can stay awake because we're worrying about it, right?
Yeah.
We can learn strategies about not thinking about that. Now, that's very easy said when tinnitus is very prominent and so on. It's difficult to reason that out and just by willpower somehow suppress it. But what we do know is that difficulty in getting to sleep can be managed. We've done studies and we've looked at what's called sleep onset time.
Okay.
And we've recorded that using smart watches, record sleep and so on. And using therapy, we can dramatically reduce the amount of time between when a person wants to go to sleep and when they actually do. So that is a modifiable thing. Some of it is around strategies about having background sound.
Okay.
Um,
Modifying your
yeah,
environment then.
modifying your
Okay.
environment, what we call sleep hygiene, making sure that the environment is great for sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
If that's great, then the tinnitus will also be helped. Um, when the tinnitus does arise, not to worry about it at that particular point in time, about saying, look, I'm going to think about the tinnitus the next day when I'm awake, when I can apply some
Right.
uh, more thought to this process rather than worrying about it. These are not easily undertaken. They can be trained,
Mm-hmm.
however,
Mm-hmm.
and if that does happen, it's very successful, and people can learn. They wake up, they hear the tinnitus, but it doesn't prevent them from getting back to sleep again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm hoping that this kind of conversation that we're having will help Uncle Joe, who has this problem, by somebody letting him know that there are things that we can do about
Yeah,
it. And yeah, and it won't always be this bad forever. And there's things that he could
absolutely.
do.
So,
Mm.
tinnitus is not a life sentence of experience, and it's not that it was going to continue to get worse.
Yeah.
It's certainly not a sign of a mental health illness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, these sorts of things can all impact, but tinnitus is that sound that you hear when
Mm-hmm.
it's quiet.
And there's a difference between noting that you're hearing it and then also getting upset and distressed by it. There's a very big difference
Yeah,
between those two. So hopefully
abs-
we can help people move a little bit more towards the just noting it. And yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Um so so just kind of wrapping up that sort of concept a little bit. So there's an interaction between stress, anxiety, your emotional response to noting that you're hearing it, and your attention possibly. So it's all kind of correlated, um, along with hearing it. So it's not simply the sound; it's how your body and your whole fight or flight, potentially, or physiological reaction, as well as your brain's reaction to hearing
Yeah.
the
So
sounds, kind
so
of
so
combined.
yeah. So Leslie, this is a lot like pain.
Right, right.
Okay, so
Okay.
you can have a painful injury, but how you perceive that is not always related to the extent of the injury.
Right.
Like cuts, right? You
Yeah.
notice how painful paper cuts are?
Way more.
They're
But
tiny little things,
to be
right?
honest, it hurt more
Uh,
than my broken ankle last week.
yeah,
That's for sure.
and these sorts of things, the brain can have a very powerful impact.
Mm,
So it's not necessarily the extent of the injury that determines the impact on us. There's
right.
a whole lot of other factors that determine that.
Okay. Okay. That's an interesting analogy as well. Um, we talked in episode 1 quite a bit, that hearing is a gateway to several other aspects of overall health and well-being, and even healthy aging. So we talked about the interesting relationship between hearing and sleep, hearing and memory, and integrating with balance, and even tinnitus. They can all have a reciprocal kind of effect. How you've talked a little bit about it, but just to flesh it out a little bit more, how would you say that tinnitus affects memory or mental well-being, possibly even sleep? How they all kind of correlate?
Yeah. So this can impact on many aspects of life. The most obvious one where it impacts is the emotional aspect. When you are going through your daily lives with a continuous sound that is not moving. It's there. It's not changing. It goes wherever you go. You might want to walk out of a room and relax after a busy meeting, but this goes with you. So the emotional impacts, because of its unusual characteristic, and its incessant nature, can be really troublesome. So most people will know someone that are really bothered by tinnitus. So the emotional one is well studied, well established. A little bit of a chicken and egg scenario. The tinnitus can result in emotional distress.
Hmm.
Emotional distress can certainly result in tinnitus
Right.
becoming more and more obvious. So highly intertwined there.
Hmm.
When it comes to things like sleep, again, if we think about our emotional upset. If we go to bed and we're worried about things, inevitably we struggle to sleep. So it's difficult often to pull these things apart, right? But the sound itself can have an impact.
And I suppose if you don't get enough sleep, then your resilience in general is down as
You
well.
wake up, you
Yeah.
don't feel
Yeah.
great. The
Yeah.
first thing you hear when you wake up is the tinnitus. So it's
So
relatively
you
easy
might
to
get
blame the
annoyed.
tinnitus
Yeah.
for how you feel as well. When it comes to things like memory, cognition, um, it's believed that because a person is thinking about tinnitus, they are having to apply energy, listening effort, that means that there are fewer resources to spend on other things.
Right.
So it can impact that. That area is a little bit earlier in its scientific knowledge than the emotional aspect for so on. But we know that often in the testing that we do, people with tinnitus do perform poor at cognitive tasks. That's also linked in with their hearing as well, and possibly also sound sensitivity.
Yeah.
Becomes difficult to extract those parts. But generally, tinnitus is going to have a very holistic effect. And that's also why we need to sort of manage it in a very holistic way. And trying to manage one aspect of it may not work because something else will pop up. It's a little bit like a whack-a-mole game where you're trying to hit the object to score points.
Yes.
And when you hit it, it pops up in another place. This is the characteristic of tinnitus and tinnitus treatment historically, has been that singular mechanism focus and singular treatment focus. And it's well recognized now that multidisciplinary, multimodal, polytherapeutic means of trying to manage tinnitus. So not just addressing one aspect,
Yeah.
but actually looking at the overall individual and their characteristics, what drives tinnitus for them, and then trying to manage each different element. And if it changes over time, being willing to address that new element. So you're essentially ticking things off your list of problems
Yeah.
until you end up where the number of problems that you have are very small and the way that they impact your life is minimal.
Right. That makes complete sense to me. Because even saying I have tinnitus and you have tinnitus, our experiences are going to be completely different. So it makes total sense to me that you'd have a tailored approach for each person. Um, that brings me to my next question about treatment. So what actually helps?
Mm. So there's some really simple things that people can do,
Yeah.
right? And the first thing is having understanding their tinnitus. So making sure that they are not unduly worrying about something because there's mystery associated with it. Being very careful about going onto the internet and reading stories there. There's a lot of misinformation. People are generally aware of that. There are some genuine stories there, but often they will be the worst of the worst as well. You won't hear the stories about how tinnitus wasn't a problem for me
Right.
because that won't be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So understanding tinnitus, some good knowledge there, understanding that it can often be a very small injury or change, and it's the way that the brain is working on that. Trying not to train the brain to be good at hearing it. So people, particularly when they first hear it, will want to see whether it's changed. So they'll potentially get into the habit of saying, well, it's lunchtime, I'm going to go to a quiet space and listen to my tinnitus.
Right.
That's undertaken with the best of intentions, but the side effect of that is you're training yourself to become very good at hearing tinnitus.
Right. And you
It's
can see how easy that would be to get into that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it's a little bit like I notice that there's a tennis court up the road, right? And people go to practice tennis, and they take time to get play, and they practice their serve,
Yeah.
right? They get better at it.
Yeah.
If you go and listen to your tinnitus,
Yeah.
you are going to get better and better at hearing it.
Right.
So that's a little bit of a strategy. Making sure people avoid sitting in a quiet room listening to the tinnitus.
Okay.
People seek desire that silence, totally understandable. But as an interim strategy, rather than sitting and reading a book in quiet, perhaps it might be as simple as opening a window to hear the wind. It may be having some relaxing music on. Anything that prevents the person taking a pause from reading and thinking, oh, what's my tinnitus like?
Right. Yeah.
If there's a hearing loss there and it's impacting on your ability to hear, correcting that.
Okay.
And then there are therapeutic strategies. If a person does have severe anxiety and depression, and perhaps those are the main problems, but the tinnitus is accompanying that, looking at help for that as well, trying to change thought processes and so on. But the starting point is really knowledge.
Right.
And knowledge is an incredible ally in your management of tinnitus. Understanding what therapies can be done, what are not going to work, and looking at what is going to work for you as an individual as to what's going to help you is really important.
So, again, coming back to this kind of conversation, I think is hugely helpful because at the very least, we're starting with a foundation of go and get good knowledge and start with there. I also hear there is hope because tinnitus can be reduced, retrained, reinterpreted, whichever kind of words you want, by the brain. So, what about you mentioned kind of avoiding silence in at least the first early stages. What about like sound maskers and things like that? Because there's a lot of those out there. So you
And
talk a little
people will
bit
like
about that.
different sounds. So sounds that are typically used as a background sound, it might simply be the radio on. Nothing wrong with that. Um, there's a thing called a sound conditioner.
Okay.
It's very much like an air conditioner. These are reasonably popular in very noisy cities. They're not used in that case for tinnitus. They're used to try and drown out the noise of the city.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so it's like an air conditioner purifying the air or getting the temperature right, but it's the sound level there.
Okay.
Really, when it comes to sound, there's a couple of important things. One, you want it to interfere with tinnitus without it being too loud. The sound should be less annoying than the tinnitus.
Yeah.
And ideally, the sound should be something that the individual enjoys or is easily fades into the background. This is where white noise is quite useful.
Right.
And because
if
if
that's
it's
pleasant for
if
you.
it's pleasant for you, and a lot of people think, oh, that must be a horrible sound. I don't like that. Well, actually, if you play it at a low level, it really begins to fade in, and your brain, really, the communication within the brain is a little bit like white noise. And so that's an easy signal for the brain to actually integrate and compete with tinnitus and become used to it. But any sound is good. It takes your mind off the tinnitus. Some people listen to talkback. That drive me mad. But some people listen to talkback, and because they're engaged, they're not thinking about the tinnitus. That's helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe it's situation specific as well.
Right. Okay. So I'm definitely hearing it needs to be enjoyable to you. It needs to be specifically tailored for you as well. So if you are someone who tends to anxiety or depression, to look at that. If you have a hearing loss, look at that. So and you won't really know until you start unpacking all of these things. So to me, it's kind of like a matter of pairing the correct toolkit to a particular brain, I suppose, or a particular personality. So, okay.
Absolutely. And as clinicians, it's really important for us to be able to, as you say, unpack and help the person understand what that actually is, what the problem of tinnitus is, unpack it, and then see what's in our toolkit that we can help that person manage that problem and essentially use what we call neuro rehabilitation techniques. And, that's essentially like physiotherapy for the ear or the brain
for the brain,
to try and train the brain to reverse some of the things that it's gotten trained with tinnitus,
Ooh,
and that can be done.
okay.
So, things like correcting for any hearing loss,
Mm-hmm.
identifying the triggers for tinnitus,
Mm-hmm.
looking at those sorts of things that are problematic. Is it attention? Is it sleep? And then having strategies that you can apply for those specific things.
Okay. What doesn't work? So I guess as a myth busting, any scams or myths that are out there that we could.
Yeah. So lots of scams, right?
Okay.
Lots of myths. What I always tell a person, however, first, if they have tried something
Mm-hmm.
and their tinnitus has worked, that's worked for them.
Yes.
Okay. Just don't assume that it will work for everybody
Right.
else. So there are lots of common things on the internet that are sold, herbal remedies, medications. It's unclear necessarily what's in them, but they've given names, tinnitus stop or stop the ringing or whatever, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
They have no proof in science.
Okay.
Um, Simple things, for some people, changing your diet can help.
Okay.
For other people, that's not going to have an
Right.
effect.
Right.
There used to be something that I certainly was taught, that people should not drink coffee, right? Should stop caffeine. In fact, the evidence suggests that people that drink caffeine are less likely to get tinnitus.
Right.
But there will be people that are sensitive to tinnitus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if a person has been told, oh, I did this and it helped my tinnitus,
Mm-hmm.
just be aware that often that won't translate to the general population. There are things that we are certain help. That's positive thinking, addressing emotions, addressing sound, improving hearing. Some other things are a little bit less dicey, are more dicey. And generally, if you read it's a cure for tinnitus,
Mm-hmm.
it's a surefire
Mm.
reason not to go there, because currently there are no cure-alls for tinnitus.
Right.
Therapies can be very effective,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not a magic silver bullet.
Right. Right. So if it sounds too good to be true.
It may well be, and just
Mhm.
ask yourself, does this really make sense?
Okay.
Anything at the moment that promises within a week
Yeah.
to change your tinnitus is probably too good to be true.
Right. Yeah. And as you said before, that the one size fits all approach, i- it's not going to work because it needs to be a personalized, holistic, tailored for the individual
Yeah.
approach
And we
to be
talk about the
effective.
concept of
Yeah.
prescribing a tinnitus treatment.
Mm.
So listeners may be aware that cancer treatment has advanced remarkably over the years, because now there is recognition that there are all these different types that will respond to certain drugs or
Mm-hmm.
not,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to change that up. That's where we're going with tinnitus treatment. We're getting to the point where we can much more readily tailor therapies.
Right.
And rather than there being a cure-all
Right.
or the search for a single medicine,
Yeah.
we're now looking more broadly, more nuanced at tailored therapies that are intended to look at the individual's makeup, what they're experiencing with their tinnitus, and then address that.
Now you've recently developed a new tinnitus product. So at just a high level for our listeners, what problem are you trying to solve, and how is this different to some of the things that have come before?
Yeah, well, of course, I'd like to say it cures everything. We're going to stay away from that.
Yeah.
Um, it's been based on the work that I've done for the last 25 years,
Right.
where we've found things that have worked, things that haven't worked.
Mm-hmm.
And we've identified this personalization is really important. So it's a digital therapy. Consists of interface for clinicians where some test results are put on that help personalize therapy. Earphones that are provided with the software that's downloaded onto the user's phones.
Okay.
And it's a 90-day therapy program where the individual is asked to do a total of 1 hour per day. And that 1 hour is made up of a prescription for that individual's characteristics. So what they see as their main problem, that will be where the therapy provides the greatest emphasis, and it will change. It's adaptive over the 90 days of
Okay.
therapy. So what people are doing in the beginning will change, because we also know that, for example, once a person has gained a little bit of control over the tinnitus, we really want to move into a therapy stage where we're actually trying to reduce the magnitude of the tinnitus.
Right.
So it's a sort of problem. If a person's goals change, the therapy changes with that. So, for example, if they have sleep as their primary problem and we're focusing on that with the therapy, and then that moves to being no longer a problem, the therapy will reorganize itself based on those
That's clever.
characteristics, and it adapts. So it's trying to address the sensitization across the broad aspects of tinnitus, but specifically it targets three elements. It's tinnitus loudness, the awareness of the tinnitus, and the annoyance. And we know within studies of how the brain works that this is actually part of what we call a tinnitus core, a number of brain regions that are activated for almost all people that experience tinnitus for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know this with the research that we've done, where we've looked at brain activation with therapy. These are the regions that we actually can modify as well. So our goal, if we reduce one or all of those three factors, we begin to reduce tinnitus magnitude.
Oh, fantastic.
And then what we're aiming for at the end of this therapy is that tinnitus is obviously not a problem for that person, that for the majority of time they're unaware of it.
It's kind of like rehabilitation for the brain, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
yeah,
and this is a form of, again, that the concept of neurorehabilitation.
right.
It's training the brain to not be good at hearing tinnitus,
Yeah,
right, but become good at hearing other sounds.
right.
So we use the analogy of an individual practicing tennis to get good at the tennis serve,
Mm-hmm.
and a person listening to their tinnitus to become good at listening to tinnitus.
Yes,
We're reversing that process.
right.
We're training a person instead, they're not playing tennis, it's a golf swing or some
Right.
other thing.
Yes,
They get
yes.
very, very good at that. And with that, they become less good at the other thing. And so we are able to what we call down regulate
Mm-hmm.
or reduce the tinnitus signal importance within the brain.
Right.
When that falls below a certain threshold, right, the person's awareness of that disappears. That threshold goes up and down.
Right.
That's what goes down and makes us aware of tinnitus when we're
Mm-hmm.
down and
Mm-hmm.
when we're depressed.
Yes.
When we're feeling good, that goes up
Right.
and we're less aware of tinnitus. So this is continually changing in our daily lives. What we want to do is raise that sensitivity
Mm-hmm.
to other things, reduce its sensitivity to tinnitus, so that tinnitus becomes essentially a a signal that does not have any meaning,
Yeah.
that is irrelevant to the auditory system.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, the brain has no interest in listening to it. It will focus on things that are much more important for the brain.
Moving people from the tinnitus distress and the tinnitus disorder into that
Yeah,
other category.
into tinnitus,
Yes.
but even to the point where it's tinnitus there, but actually I'm not consciously aware of
Right.
it
Right.
unless I was deliberately to go into a quiet room and listen for it.
Right.
All right. Go into a
Fantastic.
quiet room, you're going to raise the loudness of tinnitus.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're focusing your attention on tinnitus. And so, your awareness goes in.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a daily, normal environment, we're trying to train that system. And the evidence suggests that we can
Mm.
do that.
Oh, okay. That's fascinating. Um, just practical take homes for our listeners. Just what are three practical things someone with tinnitus can start doing today at home?
Yeah. So if we have a look at, loudness,
Yeah.
awareness, and annoyance is
Yeah.
3 simple things. If you're in a quiet environment,
Mm-hmm.
try and reduce the perceived loudness of tinnitus by
Yep.
having a
Some
background
kind of
sound on.
background enjoyable noise
Yep,
of some sort. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really having difficulty and you're just focusing on tinnitus, try and do something that's going to take your focus away from that.
Okay.
Is it a hobby? Is it um, going out and chopping firewood? Is it going for a walk? Moving the focus away from tinnitus.
Okay.
And then there's that annoyance aspect of it and the worry associated with it. And that's if you suddenly think, oh, I'm worrying about it, trying to find some strategies that shortcut that, moving your thoughts on, thinking about the great things you're doing or the holiday that you've got coming up. What are the positive things? And that can just help momentarily shortcut that so
Mm-hmm.
the brain doesn't get into that again, that downward spiral
Right.
or the dominoes.
That kind of loop.
Anything that
Yep.
can remove one of those dominoes so it doesn't transfer along
Mm-hmm.
that domino line.
Okay. And when should someone, if they think that they have tinnitus, when should they seek professional help?
Yeah.
What's the threshold? What's the
First thing
standards?
is if they're worried about it
Yeah.
and they're concerned that there's something going on, having an assessment of their hearing reassurance. It's unlikely that there will be anything specifically identified to worry about,
Yeah.
but that should help,
That's yeah.
right? So that's the first thing. Now, if the tinnitus is impacting on their daily life, that's when you want to begin to think about, well, why? Why is it?
Yeah.
If it's not a problem, don't need to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily going to become a problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
If it's beginning to impact on the daily life, understand how it is. And if there is some assistance needed for that, often it will be associated with a hearing loss. The two go hand in hand. Often it will be associated with loudness sensitivity. That goes hand in hand. And if it's really beginning to impact on you, you're worrying about it, you're thinking about it a lot. Look, just go and see someone about that and try and seek someone out that will understand the tinnitus.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And lots of great information today, and I think quite hopeful because there's no need that people need continue suffer with tinnitus or worrying about it and carry on in isolation. I think let's go get tested. It's manageable. Let's get some proper information. Try some of those tactics at home.
And if you've
Mm,
got a confidant you can share your thoughts with,
mm-hmm.
you know, um, sometimes family can be quite dismissive of things, particularly if they've experienced tinnitus, but it's not a problem for them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But
And
everybody is
but it
different.
different,
Yeah, yeah.
but if you've got someone that you can talk to about these sorts of things and just share them,
Mm-hmm.
often it helps you to articulate those and get those ideas
Mm-hmm.
out
Mm-hmm.
and have someone reflect those back can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And those may be things that you then take to your audiologist and ask about, well, what does this mean? What does this impact on me? Is this going to be a problem ongoing?
Mm. Is there anything else that you wanted to add
No, I
to the
think
discussion today?
just really the future is really quite exciting in terms of solutions for tinnitus and our understanding. The tools that we have for understanding how the brain works are only getting better.
Mm.
Our ability in the future to identify quicker therapies, whether that be along the lines of what I've talked to you about here,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be through hearing aids, or whether in fact is through medication. That is not off the table,
Yeah, yeah.
and that hope is there that as we understand more and more, and it may well actually be a combination of these things that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ultimately lead to the best results. Seeing a professional who has an understanding about tinnitus, knows what it is incredibly helpful and should really be that first step to avoiding that downward spiral and, in fact, putting it aside as not being a problem.
Yeah, yeah. And getting that personalized, tailored solution toolkit for you. Yeah, yeah. Um, what really stays with me from this conversation is still how misunderstood tinnitus is. And you know, I even see it in daily practice where other medical professionals might give people wrong information and say that there's nothing that can be done. So that kind of information is harmful. So I hope that we've managed to turn some people's thinking around today. Tinnitus is more than an ear condition. It's more of a holistic condition. And like many brain conditions in specific, the brain's plastic and can be retrained. The tinnitus can be reinterpreted and it can be made far less intrusive with the right support and strategies. So, as I've said before, this is exactly why we're having this podcast, to have these kinds of conversations. We want to raise awareness and talk about these things and not have people suffer alone in silence. So let's talk, let's share, let's normalize this information. This is about hope, not hype. If you listeners at home, if you've liked what you've heard today, or if you have any questions for Grant or any feedback for the podcast, send us your feedback on our website, www.resonatehealth.co.nz/podcast, or email us at podcast@resonatehealth.co.nz. For more information on Grant, his research, and his new product, we have put links and resources on our website. So again, that's www.resonatehealth.co.nz/podcast. Thank you so much, Grant, for coming in today. This has
Thank you
been
for the time.
really special.
Fantastic.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'm your host, Lesleigh Smith, and this is Resonate, the podcast. If you've anything you've heard today has resonated with you, carry it forward and let it echo into your life. Continue this conversation and share these ideas with anyone else who might find it useful. Thanks. Until we meet again.